Hello, good morning, and welcome to our first online lecture. This is the part B of the lecture that I promised you, meaning 4 topics in this course that we'll be looking at. So here are your tips for better understanding. 1. Stay in a quiet and distraction-free place. Quiet your mind and be focused. Take notes. Study your materials before and after. Play the topics in parts. Replay video and bring your A game. So the essence of this lecture, this online lecture, is to boost understanding. This is not a replacement of the study material that I earlier sent you. This is I am not a professional videographer or YouTuber, so this video is not up to the quality that you're used to. Please bear with us. We're all trying to make the best out of this course. Again, if you find my voice narration, the video in mute and study only your slides. Hello and welcome to our first topic. So our first topic is on Hausa states before 1800. And our objective in this topic is to look at the origin of Hausa states. Now there are 14 Hausa states, but we'll be picking only Katsina State as a case study because most of the practices in Hausa state at the time were largely the same. So we'll be examining the socio-political organization and growth in Katsina, and we'll be examining its decline. Origin of Hausa states. According to legend, Bayajida was the founder of Hausa states, and he came from Baghdad, I'm saying. And he founded the popular 14 Hausa states, right? So we'll be looking at how he was able to achieve this. So Bayajida came into Hausa land, and originally he settled in Borno. And this guy was so enterprising that he was able to marry the king's daughter. Yes, he married the maid's daughter. He married a Borno princess. And the Borno princess bore him a son called Biram. And Biram's son eventually ruled Biram, that is one of the 14 Hausa states. Eventually he moved to Dara, and he was able to marry the queen of Dara. Now you should know that at that time, queens don't just marry, they were completely committed to the throne. But this character Bayajida was such a superstar that he was able to impress the queen, and he married her. And he not just married her, this guy was also able to keep impressing the queen that eventually he gave her his own mistress called Gwari, right? Okay, so the queen of Daura also bore him a son called Bawo, and Bawo's 6 sons, eventually ruled over 6 Hausa states. And there was Gwari. Gwari also bore him a son called Kabagari, and Kabagari's 7 sons ruled over 7 Hausa states. Now you know mistresses, they have their way of being sharp. So 7 sons, 7 offspring from Kabagari eventually ruled the 7 Hausa states. Out of the 14 Hausa states, there are 2 broad divisions. One, Hausa Bokwai, or Hausa 7, was ruled over from the sons of his legitimate wives, that is the Borno princess and the queen of Dara. And they ruled over Biram, Dara, Katsina, Zauzau, Gobe, Kano, and Rano. While the 7 sons from Kabagari, that is the mistress, ruled over the 7 other states in Hausa land: Kebbi, Zamfara, Gwari, Jokun, Ilori, Nupe, and Yare. In Hausa states is that they all passed through different but similar stages of development. Here we'll be looking at the socio-political organization and growth of Katsina. And history records that Katsina emerged around 15th century. The first Sarki Katsina came to power after defeating the leader of another powerful settlement. Now that's an error, not powerful leader but powerful settlement. Now there were factors that helped Katsina grow. So number 1, the seat of power had many favors and resources used to expand and consolidate power. That is the seat of power of the Sarki, that is the king. You know, Katsina is a good example. It's in a centralized states. So in the centralized states, the kings usually had a lot of power, and these Sarkis of Katsina, they just knew how to make their seats work for them. Number 2, The rulers took advantage of the insecurity created by military campaigns for territorial expansion of other states, for example Kano, to rally other leaders in various outlying settlements to fight the common enemy. During this time in Katsina State, during its early development stages, there were lots of expansionist wars going on. The different Hausa states were all trying to grow, to dominate, to expand their spheres of interest, to expand the people under their influence, to have more land, to grow more powerful, to have more subjects who paid more taxes, and to just enrich the state and make it powerful. So number 3, another factor that also boosts socio-political growth of Katsina was the strategic location of Katsina along international trade routes, which generated much economic activities and enriched rulers. So number 4, expansion of Islam and Islamic learning. As kings were advised to build schools, mosques, and such like. There was the rise of state structures and institutions. Islam and other developments resulted in increase of state officials and institutions. Gradual social and political growth that eventually culminated into the Great Katsina region we are talking about today. And for example, of these structured institutions, the judges, the treasury, the courts, accountants, the scribes, market officials, and others, right? So number 6 factor was the arrival of immigrants. For example, rich merchants, Fulani nomads, Islamic scholars who entered and founded new settlements and further increased the population and strength of Katsina. So, of course, remember at that time, there were lots of expansionist wars going on. And Katsina was able to establish itself as a safe and strong space because the state was that could improve well-being and livelihoods. So people began to flock in there. So rich merchants, Fulani nomads, Islamic scholars, they began to enter into this society. And as they entered, they founded new settlements. The population of Katsina began to grow, and also the strength of Katsina. Right. So that is it. So if asked what are the factors of sociopolitical growth of Katsina State, I would expect you to be able to name all this. They were all important to the growth of Katsina State. Now we'll look at the decline of Katsina. Not just Katsina, had been growing steadily from the 15th century. Katsina reached its peak in the 18th century, and vibrant economic sectors in agriculture, industrial goods, cotton, dyeing, leather, iron smelting grew nationally and internationally. Main economic sectors were really vibrant. The agricultural sector was flourishing. Katsina could produce, they could market, they could sell, they could buy lots of industrial goods. They were great in leather making, in iron smelting, in dyeing. Even their goods were going beyond the borders of the entity now called Nigeria internationally. They were trading with North Africa. Katsina also had vibrant trade routes that linked Katsina with all parts of Hausa land, Borno, Volta Basin, and North Africa. I just talked about that. And again, there was also expansion of state structures and institutions, which meant that many leaders in hierarchical positions divided the gap between the rich and the poor. All right? So what we're saying up now, as Katsina was growing, so was the state structures and institutions. And it was a centralized state. So the government officials, that is the princes, the princesses, the royal slaves, military leaders, security men, judges, scribes, market official, soldier, even bodyguards, all these people who work for government knew how to exert power, and they were all maintained by the government based on taxes, on levies and gifts. And that was the situation at the time in Katsina State, right? So around the 18th century, they began to decline. And why? I read. By the end of the 18th century, all the taxes, levies, gifts, tributes became a great burden on the society. Remember, this was a centralized state. The people were not just living in Katsina because the Saraki were nice. They were required to pay some form of taxes to develop the society. So around this time, the people got tired. It was a great burden. Too many court officials, too many things to maintain, and people began to groan. Again, the burden of demand for resources to maintain expansionist Katsina wars with Gube. All right? So at that time also, the Katsina was still trying to expand. People had to tax the people. Again, there was the competition between princes for the throne and other officials that led to lots of tension in Katsina, and the pattern was the same all over Hausa land. So one thing around the 18th century, how power intoxicates. So many princes were already used to certain privilege, all wanted to be Sariki of this area or that area, or even of the whole Katsina land. And there was a lot of competition. Now, all this led to the overthrow of the king of Katsina by jihadists in the early part of 19th century. Or reasons that led to decline. I hope you understand in this lecture. She'll be able to answer this for the economic prosperity of Katsina before 1800 and to outline the reasons for the decay of Katsina and its effect on Katsina. So, thank you for listening. And welcome to our second topic. This topic will be discussing Igbo land before 1800. And our objective is to account for the origin of the Igbo, to examine the early development of the Igbo, to study the socio-political organization of the Igbo, to examine the relationship between the Igbo and their neighbors before 1800. So we'll be looking at the early development of the Igbo. The development of the Igbo society was achieved by the fusion of previously scattered semi-independent villages into larger units and into clans. They were facilitated by certain factors. So one, so rapid expansion of population and common need to secure exclusive lands for farming and other purposes was the need to provide defense among common enemies. A good example is Anandike, Aninike. That is this, if you've heard of Nikeleke, the same area, yeah. Aninike near Enugu, which built a religious shrine. This for number 3 was the evolution of culture from Nri Oka Olu complex. The Nri Oka Olu complex is simply the Nri Oka Olu area, these centers of development where originally lived and dominated, right? Excavations there dated as far back as 19th century, which proves that a culture had emerged around this area as far back as the 19th century. And even some goods, some markings, some artworks that were made in Igbo lands were found as far away as India to show that a culture, a civilization had already developed there. Special social and religious role over Igbo land and beyond. For example, Nri priests and diviners had considerable influence in Ida, Igala, and some extent Benin. So 5, Advent, that is the coming of Nri civilization, and the ventures of iron technology, first in Oka. Technology assisted in conquest, in farming, in game hunting, in warfare, produce goods with crude materials. Now had more sophisticated technology to do that. All this helped in the development of the Igbo society, right? Blacksmithing even became an organized profession, and blacksmiths established colonies wherever they went and even taught their profession to others. So here I'll be discussing the socio-political organization of the Igbo. The Igbo operated a segmentary society, both in their social and political organization. So we'll look at the social organization first. So we said they operated a segmented society with various social units based on kinship. So at the least level was the family, right? So that point there is not family extended as an error, it's family. And below the family, so the extended family, the lineages, the villages, and the clan, right? Now the clan was the highest social organization of the Igbo, right? Now other social attributes were their religion, their wealth, their marriages, If you wanted to know what the early Igbo people like, wanted to know what made an Igbo man before 1800, you will see things like that, like their religion, their wealth, their political organization. The Igbo operated a segmentary political society as well. Elders at all levels of government played prominent role. Remember that the Igbo is an example of a decentralized, a non-centralized society. They were not like the Hausas, where the king had so much power, the rule was, the seat of king was so formal. It wasn't like that. It was largely democratic, as adults male took part in decision making. And even in some cases, women also took part. The Umuada was already functioning. You would see the Igbo pre-colonial political administration and the decentralizing of powers. So the Okpara, the age grade, all title holders, the villages, all these were aged in organs of socio-political organization. And again, while the Igbo political organizations was decentralized, democratic and republican, persons of certain position, wealth and influence enjoyed some privileges. Here we'll be discussing Igbo and their neighbors before 1800. I want to say that various Igbo group and person had different contacts and relation with distant neighbors, such as Igala, Benin, Ijo, and etc. The first group of Igbo people who had notable relations with their neighbors are the Nri. Now the Nri, the Nri were quite influential within and beyond the Igbo society. The Eze Nri, diviners and ritualists, often traveled long societies performing rites, teaching and practicing agriculture, ironworks, and spreading Nri cultures such as the title system. So you see? Again, were the Arochukwus, and the Arochukwus and their gods, the Arochukwus were famed religious people. They concentrated on trade, spiritual services, and they traveled as far back as Bende and Uburu. They were famed to have acumen, diplomatic ability, and succeeded in bringing a sizable part of Igbo land, Ibibio as far as Cross River, Akpai, the Benue Valley, under the Aro influence. Yes, they were that influential. So 3, Bini Kingdom influence. Under warrior king Oba Ewuari, the western Igbo land and some places along the River Niger came under Bini political and cultural influences. For example, the Ika, that's the Ika is an Igbo-speaking community in Delta State of today. Again, the Onitsha or Igala influence. Yes, the Igala also influenced Igbo. From 1700 to 1800, activities within Suka Igbo, that is Igala and Suka Igbo people, resulted in significant culture borrowing from Igala vocabularies, titles, masquerades, among others. Right? Yeah. So number 5, Europe contacts. Igbo also had contact with Europeans. From 15th century, commercial activities existed between Igbo and Europe, with exchange in slaves, guns, swords, among other goods and services. Of course, the story of that, we might see it in depth in some other lectures, but just know that the Igbo, just like most other parts of Nigeria, had contact with Europeans, exchanged goods, services, slaves, and others. All right. And the last group of people we'll be looking at is the Ijo and Efik influence. How did these people influence the Igbos, you might ask? So the Ijo and Efik people, they served as intermediaries between Europe and Igbo trade relations for profits. They were middlemen, leading to assimilation of some Igbo culture and language. So at the time, it wasn't so rare to see some Efik families speaking Igbo. The development of the Igbo society before 1800. Right? Can you attend that? 2, account for the social and political organization of the Igbo before 1800. And 3, examine the relationship between the Igbo and their neighbors before 1800. So this is where we come to the end of this topic. I hope you understood it. Hello and welcome to our third topic. So here we'll be looking at the people and kingdom of Delta Province before 1800. Our objective in this topic is to understand the background and region of Delta Province, to examine the socio-political organization of Ijaw cities. So we'll be looking at 1 centralized state in the upper Delta and 1 decentralized state in the lower Delta region. The third thing we'll be doing here is to examine the external relations and internal changes of Ijaw city states. 4 is to examine the socio-political organization of the Urhobo and to study the trade and intergroup relations of the Urhobo. People and kingdoms of Delta Province. The term Delta Province refers to the riverine peoples of the province, that is the Ijaw, Ishekiri, Abo, as the people of the western or lower Delta, and Isoko, Urhobo, Ukwani, those are the people of upper Delta. Look at the map again, you would see where Ishekiri, the Ijaw people are located at the lower Delta region. Urhobo, Isoko, you see all those people, they are a little in the upland, right? So here I'll be looking at Ijaw city states, the socio-political organization, right? Ijaw as a case study. Now, Ijaw city states of the Eastern Delta comprises of 4 important city states: Nembe, Kalibari, Boni, and Okrika. They were centralized states and are called city states or trading states because of the role they played during the Atlantic slave trade and their participation in local commercial activities. Looking at their socio-political developments, History accounts that the Ijaw migrated from the central delta to the eastern delta and outlying regions. However, that migration posed some notable challenges and changes to the settlers. Number one, environmental conditions and occupational changes, right? So the shift from freshwater to saltwater area changed their occupation from agriculture and salt making. Two, political changes. While they retained the assembly of all adults male, in the new area, the Amanabo is what they call their king, rested, that's the king or the leader, rested with the head of the lineage that discovered the new settlements instead of the oldest male. Also, the Amayanabo became a formal ruler with considerable executive and political authority. So what this is saying is that previously a non-centralized state, but on migrating to this new area, they adjusted their political configuration to becoming a centralized state. The Amayanabo originally was headed by the oldest male, in the clan. But in this new area, the Amayanabo rested with the head of the people who discovered the new settlement. Continuation. Number four, also had economic changes. Trade with the hinterland and overseas stimulated an increase in the population. Social status changed from age and hereditary to individual talents and political changes. While house systems was practiced in both central and eastern delta region, there were changes. So they practiced something called house system, right? Now, in the old central delta, house system was rigid and absolute loyalty was expected from all members. In eastern delta, houses were distinguished by their material possessions, such as numbers of canoes used for, that's for not fair, furtherance of trade and fighting words. And again, in this new area, acquisition of capital or rising to a strong economic position was basic requirement for establishing houses. And even slaves of proven ability and capacity could establish their own houses. So here we'll be looking at the Ijaw City State external relations and internal changes. In history recorded that the Portuguese were the first to arrive on the coast of Ijaw and they engaged in slave trade, which they shipped to European colonies in America. Later, food crops such as cassava and maize were introduced into the delta areas. Slave trade peaked in 1700 to 1800 and attracted other Europeans, the Dutch and English, who eventually took control from Portuguese as leading partners. Again, long trade wars were also fought between the Ijaw City states as they competed for stakes in the trade. So, what were these internal changes? So there was more wealth and the rise of economic activities. And all this gave rise to the birth of new dynasties, where political powers passed from hereditary rulers to the new rich. For example, at the Purple dynasty in Boni and Mingi dynasty in Nembe. Their socio-political organization and the Urhobo are located in the upper part of Western Delta region and were a non-centralized states. Up to 5 Urhobo clans have origin in Ijaw, while other clans claim link to Bini origin, perhaps to identify with certain prestige and legitimacy, vital to ward off, chase away political threat from powerful neighbors. Socio-political organization. So you see, and decentralized states have largely similar. Family, which was the smallest unit, their quarters, and the village group. And in terms of their administration, that is their political administration, they had the Council of Elders, the Ekpapo, which was charged with vital decisions affecting entire villages, including warfare. They also had the village spokesman, Otata, who was also a key official in the village council. And the war commander, Iletu, was also a member of Council of Elders, though he may be young. And in their socio-political systems, we see systems like age grade system, titled societies, and others. Right. The Urhobo specialized in agro-produce, in cassava and palm oil, which was exchanged with their water neighbors for fish, salt, and pottery wares. They engaged in 1, local trade with their Ijaw and the Shekiri neighbors, and 2, long-distance trade to distant places. By 1600, which ushered in European trade, Urhobo benefited in the trade, though the Shekiri served as a link. However, Urhobo changed from beneficiaries of the trade to victims from 1800 onwards. Remember, these people are highly heterogeneous. So while they may have the same features, while they may all be from the Niger Delta region, you should not call an Shekiri man and a Urhobo man, and you should not call an Ijaw man and Abo man. They would just not have it. So as students of history, you should be able to distinguish the differences between these various cultural groups. And if you're ever in doubt, you could always ask. So here are your study questions. Hello and welcome to our last topic. We'll be examining the coming of Islam up to 1800. And our objective will be to establish the background information of Islam and to examine the pattern of establishment of Islamic tradition. So, to Muslims, Islam means total submission to the will of Allah. It was preached and spread by Prophet Muhammad in Arabia early in the 7th century. It spread to North Africa between 634 to 644. And since North Africa had established trade links with West Africa, it was inevitably introduced by Muslim merchants who participated in Saharan trade. In Kanem Borno, the earliest indication of Islam influence was in about 686 AD, but it was not until late 11th century, according to Borno historical records, that the first Muslim ruler reigned in Kanem Borno. In Hausa land, the introduction of Muslim was associated with the coming of Wangarawa, a group of Mande Douala Muslim merchants and clerics from Mali during the reign of Sarakin Kano Yaji, 1349 to 1385. In Nupe land, it was the Kanuri and Fulani that introduced Muslim. Pattern of establishment of Islamic tradition. There were three broad stages of spread of Islam. One, Islam was first the religion of aliens, that is, people who were not from that area, people who came from outside the area. Two, then it became the religion of elites, that is, the rulers, the people in power, and the educated people. Then three, the religion of the masses, and even later a militant religion. Now, wherever Islam, Muslims are found, they have common patterns of establishment, and we'll be looking at those patterns. Number one, they usually, they usually settled in their quarters, where they established mosques, prayed 5 times daily, had unique dressings, abstinences, they had certain culture, they carried themselves a certain way. Two, dispersal of Muslim and spread of Islam was facilitated by trade, warfare, immigration, and intermarriages. Yes, even till today, what brings Muslims down here? Trade, isn't it? And some other reasons. Three, some welcomed Muslim scholars, especially those famed with mystic powers, as they thought them capable to help them to win wars, to cause rain to fall during drought, enhance their prestige, offer prayers of protection against witchcraft, or nullify witchcraft. So the rulers at the time, just like rulers are wont to be, often needed something that would give them an urge. And number four, the power of literacy in Arabic possessed by Muslim scholars were required by rulers for charm making, adversary, administration, and even diplomats. Now remember, most of these Muslim scholars, Muslim teachers, some of them could read and write in Arabic. So the rulers, of course, needed them to serve as scribes, recorders in the palaces. They needed them to serve as accountants. They needed them to advise them, because these guys seemed educated. They needed to advise them on modern system of governance and administration. They even needed them as diplomats. Number five, Muslim scholars, that is ulamas, had benefiting relationship with rulers as well for permission to stay, protection, support against rivalry, and material support. So when these ulamas, when they came, most of the kings welcomed them, gave them nice rooms in the palaces, fed them, gave them position in courts, and of course, gave them permission to stay. I mean, of course, these things encouraged these Muslims to come and stay and to continue to propound their religion while carrying out trade and other activities. So number 6, once settled, Muslim scholars wooed the rulers to convert to Islam, and when successful, the ruler could induce his subordinates to follow suit, especially as Muslims will be preferred for some offices. Again, a growing number of ulamas meant the spread of learning, teaching, and practicing of Islam to other places, and of course, a growing population of Muslims. By the end of the 18th century in Katsina, majority of the population identified as Muslim. Now, as a result of all this, there was an emergence of a breed of ulamas, as Muslim scholars, who criticized prevalent non-Islamic customs and practices, especially where those ulamas, they were not in court, they were not close to the government, they were not living in the palaces, they were not chopping from the government. One thing you should know is that whenever Islam came to a particular region, it always had to contend with the traditional religious practices. So at this time, some kings were still practicing some traditional practices of outer land while also practicing Islam. So it was diluted, and this breed of staunch Muslim clerics, staunch ulamas, they criticized these practices and called them un-Islamic. It wasn't what the Prophet Muhammad wanted Islam to be, and they began to preach against it, to grumble and to preach against these practices. And finally, by the end of the 18th century, Muslim scholars such as Jibril Umar, Uthman Danfodio, and his lieutenants, having gained the influence, challenged the status quo and advocated for reforms that eventually led to jihad. This is the end of our lecture. The pattern of establishment of Islam in Nigeria before 1800. You should be able to do this. Can you do it? As promised, these are your revision questions. So treat these as some of your focus areas for your forthcoming exams. This is the end of our lectures. I hope you understand. I hope this photo, I hope they mean something. I hope this helps you to understand this course better. Thank you for listening.